in the context of the book, Intimacy with God, these various names for contemplative prayer, at least in some form, were popular for certain periods in history. The most important one hasn't been discussed a great deal in recent years, and I consider it the most important, and it comes from the wisdom saying of Jesus in Matthew 6:6. If you wish to pray, enter your inner room, close the door, pray to your Father in secret, and your Father who is in secret will reward you. So here it seems to me is a formula that might have been more detailed originally, but perhaps if there was a method, it was kind of lost. So it seems to me for all forms of prayer that lead to or are dispositive to the dispositions useful or necessary for contemplative prayer. Mm-hmm. This is offered in one or other of the names that became attached to this prayer. So the prayer, the fundamental formula speaks of prayer in secret. So right away you're in a metaphor that is very arresting, to say the least. And it resonates with some of the Jewish mysticism that you find in the Old Testament, both in the patriarchs and in the prophets and in the Torah in general. For instance, you have the famous passage about Elijah. He was a great prophet, and he was on the wrong side of the controversy with a very violent lady named, I think, Jezebel. And she had priests that served her pagan deities, and he brought down fire, if you recall the story, on his sacrifice, and then the priests of Baal, they cut themselves and jumped around, and nothing happened. Whereupon I think he killed all the priests, and naturally she was upset. And she tracked him down in the desert, and he was running away, and finally sat down under a tree and said, this is it, all the prophets are dead, I'm the only one left, I've had it, let me die. And so, well, at this point in the story, an angel appears, gives him something to eat, which is always a help, and in the strength of that food he walked for 40 days, 40 nights, according to the text, to Mount Horeb, and there on the top of Mount Horeb, God said that he would pass by, give him a view of his obviously we're talking about a mystical presence here, an experience. So he's standing, he's in this cave, and along comes a hurricane, a huge wind that blows the boulders all around, and God was not in the wind. And then there was an earthquake, everything shook, rocks flying around. God was not in that power play. Then there was a fire of great proportions, and God was not there. And finally, Elijah heard a whisper, and it was in sheer silence, the text said. There was just sheer silence. And then Elijah recognized that this was God, wrapped himself in his cloak, and went to the entrance of the cave. Another event, if I may give this background. Yeah. Moses, of course, is a very prominent figure in Jewish history and mysticism, at that matter. So when God appeared in the burning bush, if you recall, sending Moses to Pharaoh to deliver his people from the slavery of Egypt, Moses naturally asked, well, who shall I say sent me when I see Pharaoh? So God said, well, my name is I am. Or as some quotations have it, I am, or I am that I am. it's not an easy thing to translate. But what is communicated in all the translations is that this power that met with Moses at the burning bush was isness, without any limit in any direction or in any conceptual form whatsoever. It just is. So everything that is must be in relation to isness in some way. And so insofar as we participate in the divine creative manifestation. And hence there is something within us. It's an interpretation of what the image of God means that Genesis refers to. There is something in us that is vibrating on some very subtle level of body, soul, and spirit that mirrors the presence of God in some way that only a creature that has intelligence and will could do. In other words, up until now, as someone has said, everything just reflected God, but unconsciously. There was no consciousness of the gift. Now, with the human intelligence developing rather slowly, some view, this presence is now appreciated, or it can be thanked, or it can be praised as a great artist. And indeed, creation is an incredible, fabulous expression of the most creative activity in every level, including the subatomic world and the astronomical world, which our mind can't wrap around either. In other words, there's a whole world of creation that we have no way of knowing, but what we do know is quite significant. And isness is in fact, Ramana Maharshi, as you know, the great pundit of India, great embodiment of Advaita Hinduism, he said, this is the best description of the Absolute that ever was. I am. Never ends, never began, just always is. So this is really the primary movement of any mysticism, is this resonating to the awesomeness, the wonder, the greatness, the goodness of a, you can't say a being, because God is beyond both being and non-being as we know it. So it's a mystery that is tremendous in the sense of being overwhelming and something our intellect can't get around. It can't. So this is really a starting point, it seems to me, for mysticism as a relationship with reality as it is, rather than as we perceive it or would like it to be or conceive it to be. One of the great Episcopal theologians, John Macquarie, has this definition of God. God is reality. It's a magnificent description in one word. But again, anything you say about God really doesn't work. St. Thomas Aquinas put it this way in the Middle Ages, that we know more about God by what we do not say than by anything that we could say. And so, as the Buddhists have known even from earlier periods, whenever you start talking about God, you've ceased to manifest God. So God is not manifested in talking or thinking so much as in manifestations of being. So if the problem is that God is so present that we have no faculty or instrument with which to interpret that presence, and so it seems to be absent. It's so present that we can't handle it, but that doesn't make it go away. It's still there, we just think it isn't. And so the whole adventure of life is becoming more and more aware of what is, including ourselves. So to penetrate or to find God in the fullest possible way, I guess we have to become secret ourselves, because that's where he is. So the secrecy consists in letting go of our external environment that preoccupies our mind, symbolized by the inner room that Jesus recommends going to. Closing the door, a symbol of letting go of the interior dialogue, which is sometimes noisier than the world outside. And then moving a further step to forgetting the self. That is to say, to losing temporarily here, one's self-identity, or the enormous propensity to reflect on what's going on in our life, even if it's silence. It's still an inclination to think about that. So prayer in secret, then, is sheer silence. It's not an emptiness. It's the fullness of everything. It's not a place to go, since you're already it. It's not something you have to earn, because it's a part of our very nature. It's something, in other words, we have to realize, awaken to, and various terms that are used, or be transformed into. And the fact that this seems to be an overwhelming project, and all mythical literature points to the struggle to find, through various trials to come. The hero goes into the cave, or he goes to the bottom of the sea, or the end of the world, or top of a mountain, all symbols of the active search for a presence that is already there. So you finally, most of the literature, he finally comes home and realizes that's where he was all the time, and what he was looking for was right within himself.